Hello and welcome to Fantasy Life Show. Happy Thursday, everybody. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz. It is a great day to be great. It's a great day to break down upgrades, downgrades, Freedman's favorites, and Dwain's sicko starts in another edition of our ranking show. And of course, accordingly, joining me today, none other than Dwain McFarland and Matthew Freedman. Some might say Fantasy Life's finest. So fellas, happy Thursday, happy week 8. Dwain, how are you?
I'm excellent. I'm just glad you didn't go to Freedman first, because it would have been a total buzzkill. He would have talked about how week 9 is better than week 8 or some weird stuff, which technically could be true if you're thinking purely from a workload standpoint. No bye weeks this week. So Freedman's probably bummed that he actually had to write about more players or something like that. But me, Ian, personally, I'm feeling fantastic. You know, we got Bryce Young returning to the lineup. How could I not feel good?
Freedman football. It's on television tonight. You got to be feeling good about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Although Dwain is 100% correct. Week 9, unquestionably better than week 8 because it's the midway point of the season, right? I like being able to look at sort of very clear mile marks, and week 9 gives us that very clean midway point of the season. Week 8, what is it? It's just it used to be the midway point of the season. Now it's just week 8.
It's our old fling. Now it's just week 8 sitting there reminding us of what could have been back in the past. So, okay, I'm excited for Thursday night at least, but it can go and ebb and flow depending on who you talk to. Regardless, fellas, plenty to get through today, including plenty of news that went down during an ever eventful NFL Wednesday. So we're going to roll through that before we get into all of our good ranking talk, starting with some quarterback news. Sadly, Commanders QB1 Jaden Daniels not practicing with that rib injury again. Would really make sure you guys have some backup insurance, because I kind of would be surprised at this point if we do see him starting Sunday against the Bears. Dolphins quarterback Tua Tagovailoa back to a limited practice and continuing to trend towards suiting up Sunday. Good news for literally everyone involved in the Miami Dolphins organization and maybe the city as well. Jets quarterback Aaron Rodgers dealing with now a hamstring injury on top of the ankle and knee issues. Sounds like someone that was 30 plus years old playing pickup basketball for the first time in a while. Browns head coach Kevin Stefanski officially announced Jameis Winston will start despite DTR practicing in full. Also said that he will no longer be calling offensive plays. Offensive coordinator Ken Dorsey will be taking over that job. Saints quarterback Derek Carr still not practicing with that oblique injury, and accordingly, we are expecting Spencer Rattler to be the quarterback against the Chargers per head coach Dennis Allen. Titans quarterback Will Levis considered a long shot for week 8 due to that shoulder injury, but Freedman, perhaps the biggest news is the return of 2023 number 1 overall pick Bryce Young. He will be starting in place of Andy Dalton, who suffered a thumb sprain during that car accident. So, Freedman, I know one of the things you've constantly done throughout your time here at Fantasy Life is have the point spread adjustments depending on, who's starting and who the backup quarterback is. Moving from Andy Dalton back to Bryce Young, how big of a switch is that in your opinion in terms of both the point spread and also maybe just the projections for the passing game?
So at Fantasy Life, we have a quarterback against the spread value chart, which shows how much against the spread each starting quarterback is worth relative to his backup. And we have Andy Dalton as 3 points better than Bryce Young. And what I will say is that you can see the story of this entire season within the point spread for this game. In the offseason, the Panthers were 2.5 point favorites in this game. Last Thursday, they were 4.5 point. Sorry, let me rephrase that. In the offseason, 2.5 point underdogs. Last Thursday, 4.5 point underdogs, at which point I just looked at that line, knew it was too short, bet it at that point, logged it in the free Fantasy Life bet tracker that we have. After that Thursday night game, Denver wins. Carolina still doesn't look good. Carolina doesn't look good on Sunday. This line reopens at 7.5. It gets bet to 9. The Andy Dalton news comes out, and now it has moved to 9.5 and 10 at most books. So, we have moved, even just in the course of the week, 5.5 points. And I will say, this line has not moved far enough. We have it projected at 12.5. That is how bad this team is. And maybe some of it is hey, Bo Nix is better than anticipated, but in no normal world would a rookie quarterback in just his 7th or 8th NFL start be favored by 10 points, even if he's at home, even if he has a 3-day advantage on rest and prep. But this is not a normal world. This is like Bryce Young's devil world, and we are living in it.
If there's one quote I want put on a social media graphic after this show, I want it to be that. This is Bryce Young's Devil World, and we are living with it. Well said, my friend. Guys, some running back updates. Jonathan Taylor, Travis Etienne, Tajay Spears, Jonathan Brooks, all practicing in limited fashions. Great news for JT. Etienne not changing anything from last week. Same thing with Brooks. Tajay Spears, though, tentatively could be able to play here in week 8. Also, no Bucs running back Bucky Irving not practicing due to a toe injury. That is indeed new. Obviously, would be a Rashad White and Sean Tucker led backfield if he misses time this Sunday. Also note Saints RB Alvin Kamara been playing with a broken hand, and also he said some broken ribs earlier in the season, so helps explain maybe why his production has fallen off a bit after that electric first month or so to the year. And finally, the Ravens have actually designated Keaton Mitchell to return from IR. Great news after having seriously one of the most, gory knee injuries I can ever remember seeing last season. Over at wide receiver, Dwain, the big news is going to be this 49ers passing game. Obviously, Brandon Ayuk already out for the year. Yeah, I was doing our ads and drops on one of our teams yesterday, and you pointed out that, I accidentally kept Brandon Ayuk on our roster, and I was going to cut Dameon Pierce or someone instead. It was for sentimental reasons. We don't have an IR spot in some of these leagues, but in all seriousness, yes, Ayuk out for the year. Deebo Samuel not practicing with an illness. Juwan Jennings not practicing with a hip. And man, George Kittle, even with the foot injury, not practicing as well. So Shanny did say that Deebo does have a chance to play this Sunday, so that'd be nice. But if he is out, Dwayne, along with the rest of these guys, is there anyone we can trust here other than Jordan Mason?
Yeah, evidently I don't understand how pneumonia works. I thought pneumonia took a little bit of time to get and then get bad, which apparently the 49ers had no clue about somehow leading up to the game for Deebo. But now miraculously, talking about an illness that usually takes multiple weeks to get over, he's going to be ready for next weekend. Not buying it. And we also know we're not getting any good reporting out of San Francisco. So I'm completely assuming that Deebo Samuel is out, and this is complete crap from Kyle Shanahan just because he wants to keep the other coaches guessing and thinking that they have to prepare for Deebo Samuel. So I do think it is going to be Ricky Pearsall as the wide receiver 1 for this team this weekend. Now, we don't know what he can do with that. But I will say with the 49ers, they are a team that has shown, Ian, to be able to elevate their players. We've seen it over the history. We can go back and name like a lot of these guys, Juwan Jennings being one of them, scored over 45 fantasy points in a week this season. That happened, guys. So Ricky Pearsall, their first-round pick out of Florida, he was recovering from a gunshot wound. Last week was his first game to be active. He had an 18% target share in that game, which isn't fantastic, but I have him right now as wide receiver 37. Ian, I know you haven't had a chance to adjust yours, so I'm quite a bit higher than you. I'm definitely the highest on the site, but I am assuming that at a minimum, Deebo Samuel is out. I'm looking at George Kittle. He's still in the ranks, but very questionable. And I'm starting to lean towards Juwan Jennings not playing. So if Juwan Jennings doesn't play, I think I would move him even a little bit higher. I think he has to be in the wide receiver 3 range if Jennings and Deebo don't play. And if Kittle doesn't play too, honestly, I think you do get to a point where I don't know if that's good. Because it'd be nice to have one other player to at least take some of the pressure off of a guy like Pearsall. But I'm looking at a borderline wide receiver 3 right now, but he could be firmly in the wide receiver 3 conversation by the time we get to game time on Sunday. And we also buried the lead, really, guys, on the Panthers thing. It's the fact that Deontay Johnson now drops way down the ranks. We're playing against the freaking Denver Broncos. We're getting Patrick Surtain back, and now we got to deal with Bryce Young back under center. Yeah, I had to move him down as well.
It's almost like, Dwayne, we had Deontay Johnson as our featured downgrade in our wide receiver section coming up. But no, it's okay, man. Go ahead and go rogue. I don't mind. Seriously, man, it's okay. All right, rest of the wide receiver news. Puka Nacua, questionable with a knee injury. Cooper Kupp is off the injury report and will be suiting up tonight. Great day to be great there. Jordan Whittington has been ruled out. Would have been nice to know that maybe last week. Just saying. Seahawks wide receiver DK Metcalf not practicing. Unlikely to Thursday as well. Consider him very questionable for this week. Chris Olave, though, back to a limited practice as he progresses through the concussion protocol. That is good news. Zay Flowers not practicing with that ankle injury. That is bad news. Titans wide receiver Calvin Ridley not practicing, but expectation is he will play. But Freedman, the big wide receiver news that caught my eye, Lions head coach Dan Campbell speaking about Jameis Williams' potential suspension has not been made official just yet. So if the league does drag their feet, maybe we do see Jamo for another week or two. But if he is out, Dan Campbell has said that Allen Robinson will take on a quote-unquote heavy workload without Jamo in the starting lineup. Kind of surprising, given that we've been seeing more Tim Patrick and Khalif Raymond over A-Rob over the past few weeks. But Freedman, are you buying the potential emergence of 31-year-old Allen Robinson?
And I am so glad that you included this question in the outline because it gives me the final chance to put a nail in the coffin of Allen Robinson. I include him in my ranks each week just so I can have him as the lowest ranked wide receiver. He has been done not just for a couple of years. He has been done since his final season with the Bears in 2021. And at the time, I was one of the few analysts who was like, hey, I think he's actually done. He just fits the prototype of wide receiver who falls off very quickly. And since then, he has averaged 6.1 yards per target on very little volume. So it's not like, oh, he's just getting a ton of volume and he's just not that efficient with it. It's that he's not being targeted. And when he is targeted, he's doing almost nothing with them. The next year after that, 2022, all of the fantasy analysts, well, not all of them except for me, we're basically saying, hey, Allen Robinson, this is the bounce back year with the Rams. Sean McVay is going to use him a lot. They just paid him a ton of money. No, he was absolutely terrible. The year after that with the Steelers, with no wide receivers on the team, really, they needed him to step up and he did nothing. Now he's on his fourth team in 4 years. He's 31. He was dead at 28. How has he been able to resurrect himself 3 years later? It hasn't happened. No, he's not doing anything. I love this example of coach speak. Like, even if Allen Robinson is out there walking wind sprints, he's not going to be targeted. Heavy workload, I don't even know what that means. It just means I one final time have the opportunity to dunk on Allen Robinson. I do not want him in even the deepest of 32-man leagues, right? Like, he should not, even on those leagues, fine. Maybe you roster him. He definitely doesn't smell the starting lineup. You roster him just so you can cut him the next week. I'm done.
I think we have another shirt. Two shirts from Freedman in one show. This one is, I rank him out of spite. Like, just so you can put him at the bottom of your ranks. I've never heard of this before. Like, I could see Hartitz doing that with Dalton Schultz, or me doing it with Alan Lazard, but I didn't know that, like, you had this sort of venom within you, Freedman. Like, such a level-headed guy, but out of spite, you like to rank Allen Robinson last. Kudos to you, man.
That was electric. Walking wind sprints. I enjoyed that part of it as well. Tell us how you really feel, Freedman. For the record, I think my final wide receiver this week, Irvin Charles, Jets wide receiver 5, who somehow plays ahead of Malachi Corley. Funny how that worked out. Finally, guys, we do have Jacoby Myers returning to a limited practice. TJ Hawkinson, questionable for Thursday night. Would be surprised if he does make his return. If he does, would expect it to be in unlimited fashion. Dallas Goedert still not practicing with a hamstring injury. And finally, a kicker update. Cowboys kicker, a.k.a. the best fantasy player in the world, Brandon Aubrey, not practicing because of jury duty. Funny how that works out. Got to respect our judicial system, though. God bless America. So, guys, with that, going to get into some upgrades, downgrades, Freeman's favorites, and sicko starts to each position. But first, a quick word to our friends over at New Era. Get my Vikings hat on. By the way, low-key fire, maybe high-key fire logo with the Vikings. Freaking love this guy. But anyway, guys, we can join the fight against cancer with New Era Cap, the official cap of the NFL. Each cap from the Crucial Catch collection not only represents your favorite team in bold colors, but also promotes the prevention and early detections of cancer. Wear your colors proudly and help us tackle cancer head-on with the official cap of Crucial Catch. Charitable contributions are awarded by the NFL Foundation to the American Cancer Society. It is ranking season, boys, and accordingly, we are going through position by position, helping answer the toughest ranking questions ahead of week 8. Starting off with an upgrade, Dwain, someone who, honestly, if you do have some bye week issues coming up, should probably be your answer if he happens to be on the waiver wire. This week, though, talk about Sam Darnold facing a Rams defense on Thursday night that, let's face it, hasn't exactly been a group to fear this season.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, right now, Darnold is the number 11 quarterback in fantasy points per game at 17.1. So just based on that alone, we know that he should probably be in our top 12 quarterbacks, but we do have a really nice matchup here. We look at Minnesota and we look at this matchup against the Rams. We have the 4th highest team total on the slate for the Vikings. So we know that they're going to score a lot of points. And last week, Ian, I know you and I talked about it. We thought, okay, maybe we finally get into this game script where Sam Darnold is really forced to throw the ball more, and it really opens everything up. And that didn't really, play out. He did have to throw the ball more, but it didn't lead to huge fantasy points. And I think that has folks a little bit worried. And so right now he's only in 31% of starting lineups over on Yahoo. Yet we've mostly got him within our top 12 ranks over on the site. I've got him as a mid-range QB1 this week, so I haven't lost faith. You mentioned it. The Rams have been a secondary that, they've been a little better as of late, but they also haven't faced as many quality opponents. So I think you're in a situation where when you get Justin Jefferson, you get Jordan Addison, if they were to get TJ Hawkinson back, I'm with you, kind of leaning towards Hawkinson not being available this weekend, but they've got the weapons to make this thing work out. So I think the big part of why people don't have him in the lineup is because last weekend that was supposed to finally be the game where, look, the Vikings can't be ahead the whole time. 46% of plays this year, they've been ahead by 9 or more points. So almost half their plays. So even though we got the situation last week where that wasn't true, it's a one-game sample, guys. What I would say is over time, if the Vikings are in more competitive scripts, you're going to like Sam Darnold more often than not. So yeah, I've got him as QB7 right now.
Again, getting a nice matchup with the Rams this week. But then the Colts, then the Jaguars. Freedman, those defenses ranked 26th, 25th, and 32nd in EPA per dropback. I know, hasn't been the best 2-week stretch, 2-game stretch, I should say, for Sam Darnold. But we've seen some highs this year. And more than anything, I think we all can just, trust Kevin O'Connell.
Yeah, Kevin O'Connell, front runner for Coach of the Year, and I think that makes complete sense given what we've seen out of that offense, and specifically what we have seen out of Sam Darnold. And you mentioned it; it's not just that he has this matchup; he has advantageous matchups coming up. And at some point, TJ Hawkinson is going to return. At some point, that offense maybe could be better in the future than it is now, which is kind of scary to think about. I'm in some fantasy leagues, super flex leagues, where I have probably too many quarterbacks, and Sam Darnold is one of them. And the thing is, I'm not trading him, and I'm tempted to start him over guys that you would normally not think of as guys you would want to bench. But I mean, this week, are you doing Sam Darnold or are you doing Joe Burrow? It's a question. It's not a slam dunk that you go with Burrow. It's in the conversation. Do you go with Sam Darnold or do you go with Kyler Murray? You're maybe going with Sam Darnold. So it's not just that Darnold has a great matchup, although that's certainly the case. It's also that he's in a really good offense with a great coach, great play caller, and he's got some really great weapons around him. So Sam Darnold, I think, I wouldn't say for the rest of the duration, he's definitely locked in as a mid-range QB1, but he's going to bounce around in that range throughout the rest of the season as long as he doesn't regress.
Ranked in our top 8 by all 3 of us here, and you can find those full rankings over at FantasyLife.com. Guys, talk about the downgrade presented by DraftKings, of course. We appreciate our friends over there. Dwayne, Brock Purdy, someone who, somehow miraculously pulled off that QB8 finish last week, but not thinking he's going to be scoring 2 QB sneak touchdowns each and every time out. Talk about this matchup against what's been a really bad Cowboys defense, but only so much you can expect from someone without maybe his top 3 wide receivers in the same game.
Yeah, what's really interesting is I felt pretty decent about Purdy last week, but I also thought we were going to have Deebo Samuel heading into that game, and that ended up not being the case, and then Ayuk gets hurt within the game. So now really the calculus is all changed for the 49ers offense. We talked about Pearsall in the open and what he might potentially be able to do, but that's really a complete question mark. So we've got Brandon Ayuk out for the season with an ACL. Deebo Samuel, very questionable to play this weekend due to the illness. George Kittle dealing with a foot sprain. So even if he plays, he's not going to be 100%. Now, Kittle's a warrior, guys. He's going to try to do his thing. Juwan Jennings dealing with the hip injury. So once you put it all together, even though right now Brock Purdy is a top 13 quarterback, so borderline QB1, it's hard to trust him, man, with all of these weapons missing. The other thing we have is a Cowboys defense that's not been able to stop the run, period. Even when they've tried to load the box, they've struggled to stop the run. We've got Jordan Mason, who's feeling much better. We've got an offense that we know is already willing to lean into that run game with Kyle Shanahan. So I fully expect the 49ers to try to make things easier on Brock Purdy. This is probably going to be one of the games where they get to run the ball even more than they have at any point this year, assuming the game script doesn't go wild and the Cowboys somehow surprise everyone and jump out to like a 14-point lead, which could happen. Like if the 49ers turn the ball over early, you get a pick six, weird things like that. It could completely flip the script. Maybe that opens things back up a little bit more for Purdy. But even then, man, the efficiency is going to be a problem with all of these other guys out. So I would prefer to have Brock Purdy out of most lineups. I downgraded him to mid-range QB2 status. And honestly, we won't talk about the other player, but the guy you could do the same thing with, Ian, is Baker Mayfield. And Baker Mayfield's he's been a top 3 quarterback, but he won't have Mike Evans, isn't going to have Chris Godwin. So all the things we just said about Purdy, both of these guys taking major downgrades in the ranks, not due to their play, but due to the weapons around them taking a massive hit this weekend.
Again, you would think it'd be a matchup we want to target. Cowboys 31st in scoring defense this year. And as bad as they've been against running backs, still have allowed the 8th most fantasy points to quarterbacks as well. But again, Freedman, it's an offense where we already kind of struggle to get the passing volume we want. And ahead of this matchup, man, would be surprising to see Shanahan keep his foot on the gas, at least in the passing game.
Yeah, I'm going to push back gently just a little bit about Purdy. I still have him at QB10, and I'm probably wrong. But in this game, the 49ers are at home, favored by 4. They have the 7th highest implied point total on the slate. So they could still score a good number of points. And if that happens, Brock Purdy, as the facilitator within that offense, will probably get some of that production, especially because he runs a little bit more this year than he did last year, which obviously gives him a chance of getting not only extra yards on the ground, but as you mentioned, maybe a quarterback sneak, like maybe some touchdowns there. So I still like Purdy in theory as my QB10, but like it's very close between him and the guys who are like QB15 to QB17. And I will say to Dwayne's point, he is without his top 5 pass catchers. No Christian McCaffrey. He might be without his top 3 wide receivers and his number 1 tight end. That is unfathomable. Like that a year ago, we were talking about Brock Purdy as a guy who was basically buoyed up because of all the surrounding talent. And now he could be without 100% of that surrounding talent.
And maybe the QB sneaks do keep up because low-key, guys, Jordan Mason has been one of the worst goal line backs in the NFL this year. 7 carries inside the 5-yard line, -1 yards, and just 1 touchdown. 2023 Alexander Madison-esque line with that one. So we'll see if the Cowboys can get Micah Parsons coming back off their bye, but starting the week off with a DMP, hardly ideal there. So fun situation in the ranks. Again, my QB 17, Dwayne's QB 15, but Freedman's QB 10, even Waz has him at QB 7. So we will see who comes out on top there. But Freedman, if you are in a bind, don't exactly have a top 5, top 6 quarterback, maybe people could turn to your favorite of the week, Broncos QB1, Bo Nix, someone who, hey, yeah, we've all watched him throw the football. Things haven't been going great there. But man, when we get those sweet, sweet rushing fantasy points, Freedman, not the worst thing to have.
Yeah, Bo Nix has 2 things going for him, maybe 3 things going for him this week. So 1, he's at home and he has extra rest. So that's a big thing. The second thing is that he's going against a defense that is really bad and really injured. And that's pretty much what this ranking is about. And then, the third thing, he runs, but that is always there. What he really has this week is going against the Panthers. And like, I can dog on the Panthers basically for the rest of the show. I will try to keep it brief, right? It's not just that they are bad, right? Number 31 in defensive dropback success rate. It's also that they are injured, like horrifically injured. So they will definitely this week be without Derek Brown, Shaq Green-Thompson, and Jordan Fuller. So they will be without 3 players at all 3 levels of their defense. Those guys are on IR. On top of that, they could be without their top pass rusher in Jadeveon Clowney, their top remaining interior lineman and defensive tackle A'Shawn Robinson, and their top remaining midfield defender and linebacker Josie Jewell. All of those guys missed last week. We talked about the beginning of the show, how this line has moved from just 4 points last Thursday to now 10 points. Absolutely unreal. And we have this projected at 12.5. If you're looking in the betting market, the Panthers have been the league's most profitable team to bet against. Their opponents are 6-1 against the spread, 6-1 on the money line. If you like the Broncos in betting, and I think you should, it just kind of follows. You probably like them in fantasy. I think that goes to Bo Nix this week.
Hasn't been pretty. League's second worst completion percentage, over expected behind only Anthony Richardson. But again, we're in the fantasy business, and he scored more fantasy points than Trevor Lawrence, Aaron Rodgers, Kirk Cousins, even more per game than the great Patrick Mahomes. So again, that's what having that rushing floor does for you. 7th most rushing yards in NFL history, guys, for a quarterback in their first 7 games. Only 11 fewer than guys like Kyler Murray and Cam Newton. So God forbid he learns how to throw an accurate pass. Maybe the Broncos have something with their first round pick. Dwayne, though, if we do not want to go with Bo Nix, you do have a sicko start for the rest of us. Talk about this year's number 1 overall pick, Caleb Williams, coming off a buy-in. Let's face it, was playing some really good football beforehand.
Yeah, for sure. And the way I handle the sicko starts, like, as I go look to see how often these players are in starting lineups. You heard me mention it earlier for Sam Darnold, but only in 21% of lineups over on Yahoo as of this morning. So 1 in 5 teams are actually starting Caleb Williams. And for some teams, that may be the right choice. Like maybe you've got, Lamar Jackson, and hat tip to Freedman, by the way. I figured his favorite this week would be like Lamar Jackson, but he went with Bo Nix. Like I have to say, like that would even be a more sicko start than Caleb Williams. So really, we should have given Freedman the sicko start of the week. I got to give him a major hat tip on that. But yeah, you mentioned it with Caleb Williams. Rough start to the season. You and I know better than probably anyone. We drafted a lot of Caleb Williams. I think we had him in those lineups the first 2 weeks. QB 33. That's not good, guys. In case you haven't counted, there's 32 quarterbacks in the league. The guy somehow finishes the QB 33, so someone else came into a game and actually scored more points than Caleb Williams, and they didn't start the game. So QB 28 the next week, but then the bounce back, Ian. QB 11, kind of a rough game. QB 22, but then QB 6, and then QB 1. So over the last 4 games, we've got 3 top 12 performances. 2 of those have been in the top 6. We get a Commanders defense that, to give them credit, man, you and I talked about this on the Sunday night show, whenever we broke down the Commanders, we're like, maybe actually the biggest takeaway from that game is the Commanders' defense is suddenly looking a little better. Dan Quinn is starting to work some of that magic, but still, when you go look at these cornerbacks, you look at their names, you look at their coverage grades. I haven't gone and broken these guys down on film, so I'm not going to sit here and lie about that. So I am leaning into what other people are telling me about this group. It's still a very beatable unit, and you've got 3 quality pass catchers. So I like to think of this as the rule of 3. If you've got 3 quality players, you can pretty much beat any defense if your quarterback is playing well, because they can't take away all of it. So we got DJ Moore, Keenan Allen playing better, and then Rome Odunze, their first-round pick, all probably at the healthiest that they've been all season as well. Remember, Rome and Keenan were really battling through some injuries early this year. So with all of that said, that is something for me with Caleb Williams. He's moving aside my top 12. I know Freedman's actually more aggressive than me on Williams as well this week, so maybe Freedman should be getting to talk about both of these players. But I would start him, Ian, over Dak Prescott. I'd start him easily over Anthony Richardson. I'd start him over Brock Purdy, who we just talked about. I think Freedman actually has him ahead of Purdy, too, who he's got at QB 10. And then I would start him over Patrick Mahomes. So there are a lot of names right now that are in starting lineups across Fantasyland that should not be in starting lineups over Caleb Williams.
Certainly seen his hot stretch coincide with an easy stretch of a schedule for the Bears. Those 3 top 10 finishes came against the Colts, the Panthers, and the Jaguars. But guess what, guys? The schedule isn't getting any harder anytime soon. Commanders, Cardinals, and Patriots over these next 3, 27th, 30th, and 29th in EPA per dropback. So if you got Caleb Williams and some of these Bears pass catchers, yes, I do indeed think the good times are going to keep on rolling, at least until they got to face the Packers in the month. But get your popcorn ready for that one. Guys, we got plenty of running back goodness ahead of us. But first, a quick word to our friends over at DraftKings. A chill in the air, leaves falling to the ground, and football every weekend. That is what fall is all about, and you can make each weekend even more exciting by getting into the action with our partners at DraftKings, the #1 place to bet on touchdowns. And right now, all new customers who bet $5 will instantly get $200 in bonus bets. All you have to do is download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and sign up using our promo code FantasyLife. The crown is yours. Again, that is $200 in bonus bets instantly, and you can stay in on the action and use your $200 in bonus bets to bet anytime touchdowns on DraftKings. After all, DraftKings is the place to bet touchdowns. If sports betting is not yet available in your state, don't worry. You can still join in on all the fun with DraftKings Daily Fantasy and have the shot to win cash prizes. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. New customers use our promo code FantasyLife and bet just $5 on any wager to get $200 in bonus bets instantly. That's promo code FantasyLife only at DraftKings Sportsbook. Rankings, risers, and fallers presented by the fine folks at DraftKings. Dwain, let's talk about one of your upgrades of the week, a man who, if you remove the injury-shortened Week 2 game, would be the RB1 in all of fantasy. Texans workhorse Joe Mixon facing the very same Colts defense that he eviscerated all the way back in Week 1.
Yeah, man. Talk about a player that, I mean, we haven't talked about enough, and it's mostly due to the injury, but really might be the steal of fantasy drafts. I know that conversation like evolves weekly based on the injuries and things, but man, Mixon in the healthy games, Ian, running back 2, and running back 4, averaging 26.8 fantasy points per game. Guys, that's a lot. That is a whole lot. And 2 weeks ago, he did that really in a limited role, coming back from that high ankle sprain that he suffered on the hip drop tackle back in week 2. But last week, really back in that full-time role that really resembled what we saw in week 1. He had 86% of the rushing attempts last week for the team, 41% route participation, and he's had 100% of the carries inside the 5-yard line in the games where he's actually been available on the field. So that's 6 carries inside the 5. We've got an offense that, really sputtered last week against the Packers. What's amazing is even though they had taken away that passing attack from C.J. Stroud and the Texans, the Packers still couldn't stop Joe Mixon. So, I mean, this dude was the only thing they had going, and the Packers couldn't get it figured out. Obviously, they were inviting this to some extent, trying to take away the passing game from the Texans, and that worked. But Joe Mixon still came through. And so I think it's really big to see him be able to do that in a game script like that, where we had the Texans really, behind in a way that we wouldn't have really thought would have played out that way. Even without having a huge role in the passing game as far as route participation, they still get the ball to him when he's out there. Last week, he had a 17% target share. Not having Nico Collins helps because that makes potentially him the third read on a lot of plays. Okay. That's going to be Schultz or him as the underneath kind of check down player. So the other part you mentioned here, Ian, getting to play against the Colts. The Colts are good to play against no matter what position you play. It really doesn't matter. If you're on the field and the Colts are across from you, that's going to be a positive thing for you. But, man, they're giving up 160 freaking yards per game on the ground. So, I mean, and you talked about it, Mixon completely dusted them in week 1. So we'll see how the Colts respond. A lot of times in these sort of games, you get something in the first game, then that team adjusts and tries to take that away in the next game. The problem with the Texans is if you do that, I mean, C.J. Stroud's going to beat you with Diggs. He's going to beat you with Dell. So I think that there's still going to be plenty of opportunity here for Joe Mixon this weekend. They give up the 3rd highest rushing boost to the opposing running back position per game at 25 yards per game. So that's per our DVP tool. You guys can check that out over at FantasyLife.com. But yeah, man, top 3 running back, not just this week. Like, where are you guys at him just real quick? Rest of the way. Like, Joe Mixon can't be like outside your top 6 running backs, in my opinion.
Freeman?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can say, all right, Saquon easily ahead of him, Derrick Henry easily ahead of him.
Yes.
After that, it's maybe Mixon. I mean, you can make a case for some other guys, but I think it's Mixon.
Yep. Looking at our top 5 consensus ranks ahead of week 8 specifically, Joe Mixon, Derrick Henry, Breece Hall, Saquon Barkley, and Kenneth Walker. And I do think for the rest of the season, those guys, Bijan, Gibbs, maybe Kyron, and honestly, we're kind of reaching the end of the road there. So truly impressive stuff from Mixon. Yeah, of course. But yeah, really what surprised me, guys, 3 of the top 4 running backs now in PPR points per game, other than Kenneth Walker, have all changed teams this offseason, and Henry, Saquon, and yes, Mixon. So I know I've come to you guys every March and told you about how free agent acquisitions usually don't work out as well as we think they might. Well, so far, they are proving that Ian was wrong on that one. So, Dwayne, good news for Mixon. Bad news, though, for a running back who was in this conversation a few short weeks ago. Saints RB1 Alvin Kamara just got that nice fancy contract extension, so I'm sure he is feeling good, but haven't quite seen the same fancy ceiling in recent weeks, largely in part due to his own injuries as well as issues on the offensive line and, of course, under center.
Yeah, Kamara's really battling through some things, particularly the offensive line and not having your starting quarterback. I mean, so really anything that could go wrong since week 2 on has gone wrong for the Saints. And the wheels really basically came off in that Philadelphia game. They got exposed with that 6-1 front, taking away the wide zone. Now every team is just copying that. And we've yet to see really a counterpunch from Clint Kubiak. So the chosen one, the man using play action, the man getting Derek Carr under center, the man using all this motion, there's still fundamental flaws with the way that he's approaching his attack. He's going to have to come up with something different. And so far he hasn't. So I think he's got to prove that. When we look at Kamara, really last weekend, the lowest utilization score of the year for him at 6.8. And it wasn't just to do with the dud and the fantasy box score. Also had a season low across the snap share. Well, week 1 was a little better, but over the last 5 games, his season low, 58% in snap share, only 39% of the rushing attempts. Some of that was due to the game script, got out of hand at the end against the Broncos on Thursday night. But even before that, just looking in the first half of that game, only 55% of the rushing attempts. It was our first game to have Kendre Miller active, and the Saints were trying to get him involved. Surprise, guys. Like Dennis Allen, I think, hates Kendre Miller, but they were actually trying to get him involved in the first half of that game. So it wasn't just blowout. So when you put all that together, And now that we got to talk about that, it's not necessarily an ideal matchup against the Chargers. I think the Chargers defense is probably slightly overrated based on who they played. But at the same time, we've got an offense in the Saints that are trending in the wrong direction. So you put those two things together, I still think that this is a positive for the Chargers more so than for, the Saints. So just you add it all up, man, the chance of not being in as good of a role as he was in, you've been a very inefficient offense, still going to have Spencer Rattler under center. It's just a lot of things to really be able to overcome, even though he's still going to get a decent amount of touches. I will say the one thing that could save him is the Chargers are one of the most zone-heavy teams in the league, and historically speaking, when you play against zone-heavy teams, the targets spread out, right? If you play against man-heavy teams, most of the targets go to the top target earner on the team. That's typically the wide receiver one. Sometimes it might be a tight end, depending on the team. But against these zone teams, things spread out. You get far more targets to the running backs, to the tight ends. They're typically the ones to benefit the most. So I'm not saying Kamara is a complete dud that you have to bench, but, I don't think it's out of the question, depending on what you have on your lineup. So, really, Kamara downgrades to mid-range running back 2 status, but he carries far more potential of a big, nasty dud like we saw last week than what we thought a couple of weeks ago.
Dwayne's RB17 on the week. Freeman and I are actually lower RB21 and RB22. So mentioned that Chargers defense. Yeah, hasn't had the toughest schedule, but hey, you can only beat the man in front of you. And accordingly, they have allowed the fewest points in the NFL so far this season. So good job by them. Takes us to Freeman's favorite, someone who's partying like it's 2018 all over again. Freeman, Kareem Hunt. I told Dwayne on the Sunday night show, he might be an RB1 now. I don't get it, man. But at some point, you got to look at the numbers in front of you. Talk about him ahead of this, what could be a smash spot against the Raiders.
Yeah, just a little over a month ago, Hunt was an afterthought. It was like free agent available for any team to sign. The Chiefs, out of necessity, signed him. And now he's the number 1 running back, at least for the time, for the league's last undefeated team, right? Since he was elevated to the active roster from the practice squad in week 4, 285 yards, 3 touchdowns on 63 carries, 6 targets. His usage last week out of the bye was especially encouraging. 63% rush share, 47% route rate, 100% of the team's goal line carries. Of course, that data is from our fantastic FantasyLife utilization tool. And that usage coming out of the bye was especially encouraging because Clyde Edwards-Helaire was available, but they didn't use him at all. Of course, the matchup this week is fantastic. The Raiders, number 3 in largest fantasy boost allowed to running backs, and they're without defensive tackle Christian Wilkins, who is on IR with a foot injury. You have the Chiefs as massive favorites, which means Hunt could again have 20-plus opportunities for the 3rd game in a row. Head coach Andy Reid has historically dominated on the road in division, 22-10-1 against the spread in this spot. Like, it's gross, but Hunt is the focal point of the Chiefs offense.
In 2017, as a rookie, he averaged 18.5 PPR points per game in this offense. 2018, he was at 20.9 before, he got kicked off the team. And then in 2024, guys, 17.2, good for RB9 status. Just goes to show some things, I guess, don't change. Anyone could be an RB1 in this Chiefs offense, except Clyde Edwards-Helaire, of course. Okay, let's go to Dwayne's sicko start of the week. And we're getting sick, Dwayne. Only 11 touches last week, but certainly could be more of the fantasy-friendly variety with the upgrade under center. Talk about someone who was a top 5 fantasy finisher last year. Of course, I mean Dolphins RB1, RB2, Raheem Mostert.
Yeah, scouring for a sicko start at running back was tough this week. I had to really think about this one because, again, the rule I use, I go to look to see how often people are starting guys. And if it's 50%, 40% or more, I don't even consider them. I'm like, well, too many people already have them in the lineup. I can't call that a sicko start and feel good about it. So I got forced down the list this weekend, and it came out with Mostert. And so I did a little bit of research, though. If you look at his role the last game, it was Achane definitely in the lead from a snap standpoint. The carries were a little bit closer. Achane getting all that passing down work, but he's still in enough of a role, Ian, in getting Tua Tagovailoa back. We see the upside coming back with this offense. Odds makers agree. We saw a big jump this week in the expected team total for the Dolphins heading into this one. So I went back and looked. Based on his utilization right now, I think he's going to be in the 10 to 14 opportunity range. So that's adding up his carries plus his targets. And so I went back and I looked at last year. If we thought of this role last year, here are the games where he had between 10 and 14 opportunities. Mostert was RB 18, RB 31, RB 11, 34, 20, 13, 18, 21, 26. That's not bad there is some running back 1 ceiling still in there. You got plenty of running back 2 finishes. And on the low end, like you had a running back 3. You got 2 running back 3 finishes in there. So that was a nice blend. And I think getting the upside again back is the key. We could easily see Mostert punch in a touchdown in this one. We also know that he should be the healthiest that he's been this season. And he could be in a position where he could really punch the accelerator, score one of those patented long Raheem Mostert touchdowns. So I think there's a lot of outs here for Mostert to be enough to get you by at your running back 2 position if you're really banged up. And that's kind of tough right now, guys, because when we're making the ranks, Freedman, I'm sure you run into this too. Man, running backs are so hot right now, and there's so many receivers hurt. Like, I'm literally looking at my ranks when I look at flex ranks, and I'm like, I have like 12 running backs in a row. Like, I got to squeeze I'm like forcing myself to figure out, okay, I got to really rethink this. Like, which wide receivers should maybe be over some of these running backs, because there's just so many guys in really good spots and good roles right now. So I had to really crunch the numbers to get to this one. Not saying you have to use Mostert, but if you're not one of the teams that's loaded at running back, I think he could potentially get in your running back 2, maybe in your flex spot this weekend.
0 touchdowns this season, 21 last year. Maybe, just maybe, he starts closing that gap a little bit now with Tua back under center. Guys, let's move on to wide receivers in our rankings episode presented by DraftKings. And quickly, though, before we get to our upgrade, do want to share some news. Tom Pelissero reports that the Rams are actually optimistic that Puka Nacua could play on Thursday night. So just looking at our ranks right now, guys, I think we do need to have some caution. Again, we saw Jordan Whittington be able to play last week, and it was 9 freaking snaps with no touches. So when I'm looking at the borderline wide receiver 2 area, guys like Tank Dell, Jalen Waddle, Devonta Smith, Garrett Wilson, Dwayne, would you be starting Puka Nacua over those guys, or would you like to give 1 week to wait and see what happens?
I think that's about the range. It's going to be difficult to say we're going to wait and see, because we know so many people are dealing with injuries at wide receiver on their teams. So if you've got Puka Nacua and you've been waiting all this time, my guess is 80 to 90% of the time your answer is going to be, I have to get him into my lineup because I have to. But I think that's the right range, Ian. I really do. I think if you're looking at guys like Devontae Adams, Jalen Waddle, Marvin Harrison Jr., Amari Cooper, Devonta Smith, that's the range. Like, in that range, I would be looking at probably getting Puka Nacua in the lineup. Like, I'm not going to force it over Terry McLaurin, T. Higgins, Jaden Reed, guys like that. But most likely, if you've got those guys, they're in your lineup plus Puka Nacua. So I think you nailed the right range there. Probably a low-end wide receiver 2, but obviously, man, we know that wide receiver 1 upside is there. I just want to say, Sean McVay is the worst about rushing guys back too soon. We have seen it so many times, and it ends up being a setback that costs them their season. And so I think there is a scenario here, though, where we look at the Rams and where they are with their record. They're thinking, we just have to get all of our chips in the middle. We need to win this game. And I get it, because if you lose this one, where are you at from a standings perspective? But for us fantasy players, we would rather see them let the guy get completely healthy. So there's a little bit of risk here, but I think that's the right range.
Freedman, same page?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking Keenan Allen or Puka Nacua, and I know that feels like a real stretch.
Yeah,
I like, it would be tempting to play Puka, but it's like, can we foresee a situation Thursday night? We're very excited to have Puka in our lineup, and he plays like 5 snaps. Can we envision that? Yes, that is well within the range of outcomes. And it's like, wait a minute, I just benched Keenan Allen in an awesome matchup for a guy who played 5 snaps. Like, I'm really going to have to think about like how high I want to be on Puka Nacua, but I'm probably going to be pessimistic, knowing that it's a Thursday night situation and not a Sunday situation.
Opt out.
Jordan Addison or Puka?
Jordan Addison.
Ooh.
Yeah, I'm playing Puka. I'm playing Puka over all the people that Freedman just said. And here's why. Because Puka's had a long time to recover. It's not like, okay, last week we thought we might not have him, but now we do. Like, he's been out for a long time. And all the things I said about McVay, I struggle to trust him. But I just think the ceiling is too high for Puka versus those other players. I mean, we're talking about a young stud receiver in their prime. So I would go the opposite of Freedman on those. But I get where he's coming from.
Would have been nice to at least
to hit Dwayne's point. To hit Dwayne's point really quickly, he's talking about the ceiling and I'm talking about the floor. And that just might be dependent on the matchup that you are in and what it is that you want to seek and what you want to avoid. So if you're looking for ceiling, Puka all the way.
Hopefully we get some reports leading up to game time about potential pitch counts or whatever, if that's the case. So otherwise, keep an eye on our ranks over at FantasyLife.com. All right, guys, got to be a little bit quicker here because, again, we had some breaking news going on. So, Dwain, you want to upgrade Marvin Harrison Jr., and I have heard quite differently over on the old Twitter sphere. So talk about why you might be, looking at the artist known as Maserati Marv ahead of admittedly a winnable matchup against the Dolphins.
Hey, look, a lot of this process is typically we're talking about the matchups and everything for the week, but sometimes there's just regression candidates. And that's really what Marvin Harrison Jr. is. I have zero confidence in Kyler Murray. That's my biggest concern right now with Marvin Harrison Jr. But when I look at what he's doing, Ian, all the underlying data points are really good. The problem is he's given you 5.6 points, 0 points in a concussion game in week 6, and 5.1 points in week 7. That is enough to make any fantasy manager queasy, and it should. So I have a lot of people asking, can I even start Marvin Harrison Jr.? Should he even be on my roster? Is Marvin Harrison the biggest bust all time in NFL draft picks? Guys, calm down. Calm down. You really need to calm down. If you look at him in his healthy games, he has a 26% target share. Historically, you know what that is? That's a wide receiver freaking one. Targets versus man coverage, 35%. That's a freaking wide receiver one. That's an alpha. Air yards, 41%. Historically, that's a wide receiver dash freaking one. So we just really need to calm down with the Marvin Harrison stuff. We need Kyler Murray to play better. But even if Kyler could throw for 215 yards, you could still end up with a really good performance out of Marvin Harrison Jr. So that's the reality. Kyler's a problem. So that has turned him from being a guy that we hoped would be a borderline wide receiver 1 to being more of a borderline wide receiver 2. But I think people are overreacting, pushing Marvin Harrison Jr. down into the wide receiver 3 range and questioning should they even have him on their team. I got people trying to offer a trade to my son for him, and they're offering nothing. I'm like, no, I was like, don't accept that. Just wait, give it. Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to have a bounce back game. I can't guarantee you it's this week, but I had to write him up, Ian, just because the rhetoric, to your point, over on the old Twitter sphere has just gotten completely out of control.
Kyler under that 215 passing yard mark in all but one game this season. Yeah. Come on, man. Call of Duty is even out yet. We need to see more out of you there. Downgrading Dwain. Deontay Johnson. Really tough matchup here against the Broncos defense that should have Patrick Surtain back. He was a full participant in practice to start the week.
Yeah, I was just trying to save us time earlier. I knew preemptively I would jump the gun on Deontay Johnson in the open. So we don't really have to spend any time here. We've got a terrible matchup against the Broncos, and Bryce Young is under center. Problem solved. The guy's a wide receiver 4 this week. He probably shouldn't be in your lineups unless you're just completely decimated.
Yeah. Say less. All right. Freedman's favorite of the week, someone who balled out last Sunday night, even in a tough matchup. Freedman, George Pickens, now with an easier spot here against the New York Football Giants.
Yeah, love George Pickens this week. So week 5, he had a decrease in playing time, 65% route rate. People were getting kind of concerned. He rebounded in week 6, and then in week 7 had a season high 94% route rate with the switch to quarterback Russell Wilson. And with that change, Pickens 111 yards, 1 touchdown, receiving on 9 targets. He could have an even bigger day this week as Wilson, especially last week, Wilson just missed him on a second touchdown. Ian, you mentioned that in your Sheesh report. Pickens, what does there say? 9.9 yards per target for his career, ranks number 3 this year with a 50% share of air yards. He is the kind of big play threat who can turn any touch into a long touchdown. And Wilson, with all of his deficiencies, he still has that moon ball potential and is willing to take multiple shots deep, and that can maximize the upside ability of a player like Pickens. And then the Giants, number 29 in defensive pass DVOA against number 1 wide receivers, and they could be without cornerbacks Cordell Flott and Adoree Jackson, both of whom are dealing with injuries. So great, I think great situational spot for him, and then great matchup.
Freedman and I's wide receiver 14 on the weekend. Yeah, give the guy some credit. Tied for the 5th best ESPN open score with Drake London right now. And if we had a league-wide game of 500 who can get the jump ball, yeah, Justin Jefferson's a favorite. But dark horse, guys, George Pickens, that's where my money would be. Takes us, though, to Dwain's sicko start of the week. Dwain, a Packers wide receiver, someone who has scored the 7th most fantasy points of any player at the position over the past 2 weeks. Oh, wait, no, you like Dontavian Wicks. What is it going to take for Romeo Doubs to work his way into your heart, Dwain? What is it?
Well, hey, I want to say, number one, I'm thinking about taking the positional requirement away from sicko starts, because I could have made all of these wide receivers this week. Cedric Tillman's in the conversation. Jerry Jeudy with Jameis Winston under center. There's a lot of other situations where we've got Jalen McMillan over in Tampa Bay stepping into a full-time role. There are a lot McMillions. There are a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of different guys we could have talked about here, but I chose to go with Dontavian Wicks just so that I could throw shade personally at Romeo Doubs. Just kidding. Romeo Doubs, guys, go check out the ranks. I've got him higher than some other guys. Got a good matchup this weekend, but Wicks is the sicko start because he's only in 10% of starting lineups this weekend. So I think that is too low considering all the wide receiver injuries that we have. He's also available 68% of the time, all the time, Ian, and you know how that math works out. So not on very many fantasy rosters right now over on Yahoo. But if you look at Wicks, he popped off for 13.8 fantasy points per game last week, despite only playing 47% of the pass plays due to that shoulder injury and the fact that he and Christian Watson, they are rotating. We've kind of seen that throughout the year when both guys have been available. But the thing with Wicks is, man, I still think he might be the second best wide receiver on this team. Each of the last 4 games, he has led the team in targets per route run, sitting at 35%. I get it, guys. He had some drops. Guess what? I don't care. Stop coming to me on social media and saying he dropped the ball. Well, how do you drop the ball? You get a target. Your quarterback trusts you. Your quarterback wants to make a big play. People have been talking about drops like since the beginning of time. They're not sticky guys. Occasionally, yes, there are guys that can't catch. But you know what? Most of them aren't in the NFL. Most of them are not in the NFL. So when you look at Wicks, this is a guy that just has that big playability, Ian, and we get a matchup against the freaking Jaguars. Oh, my God. The Jaguars are terrible. And on top of that, the Jaguars, despite being terrible against the pass, they do a really odd thing. They actually like to expose their cornerbacks and play man coverage. Talk about backwards thinking. Most teams that have a bad secondary play zone, not the Jaguars. We're actually going to let you know where our bad players are going to be and get the matchups you want. When you look at Wicks, guess what he is? The #1 target earner on the freaking Packers against man coverage. Why? Because he's a freaking baller. He has a 26% target share against man coverage. You add all that up, Ian, and you have a guy that could boom for a wide receiver 2 finish. If, like Freedman said earlier, you need to be looking for upside here. If you're looking for floor, Wicks is not your guy. But if you're looking for upside and you're looking at him, you're staring down the barrel of a matchup that you're like, man, I really need some firepower to try to win this thing, I think Wicks is a guy you can figure out how to get into your flex.
Close start-sit decision involving a Packers player. Go ahead and take the Green Bay Cheesehead. Freedman's favorite tight end of the week, David Njoku. We got Jameis under center. Amari Cooper now resides in Buffalo, and we're facing a Ravens defense that has not been great against tight ends this season. Freedman, just like we said with Mixon, man, very short list of tight ends we would rather have than David Njoku the rest of the season.
Yeah, I was looking at the rankings. Obviously, Kittle, Bowers, and Kelsey. Maybe not even Kelsey obviously has to be ahead of Njoku, but I have Njoku right after those guys as my tight end 4. And a lot of it has to do with the circumstances that you mentioned. Now, no Deshaun Watson, so maybe we see that offense take a step forward. And, of course, the big one, no Amari Cooper. And so now Njoku really could be the #1 pass catcher for the Browns for the rest of the season. Last year, when he was in the situation with no Deshaun Watson, the final 8 games of the year, he had 80 targets, which he turned into almost 600 yards receiving, 4 touchdowns. And then, of course, there's the matchup going against the Ravens, who are now number 29 in defensive pass DVOA against tight ends. Kyle Hamilton, not really the tight end defender this year that you would have expected him to be. And so just great situation for David Njoku. And the Browns, as big home underdogs, I think are going to have to throw quite a bit, which means we could get a lot of targets going towards Njoku. 14 targets is what he had last week, 76 yards and a touchdown. I think we see something pretty similar this week.
And Dwain explained to people why, if you need a tight end, Kate Otten could be your sicko start in 30 seconds or less.
Kate Otten, a.k.a. the crash test dummy, a.k.a. the American Gladiator. This dude, like, out here getting blown up last week. How can you not like him, Ian? We don't have Chris Godwin. We don't have Mike Evans. Baker Mayfield has to throw the ball to somebody. That makes him a low-end tight end 1 this weekend.
Easy enough, my friend, and hopefully easy enough to win those fantasy matchups this week. Come on, everyone. Step up, make those right start sit decisions, and if you need some help, we got you over at FantasyLife.com. So for Freedman, for Dwain, for producer Matt, for producer Kelsey, I am Ian. Thanks again for tuning in to the Fantasy Life Show, and until next time, take care, everybody.